The first notification came like a quiet thunderclap, barely audible but powerful enough to shatter lives at exactly 9:17 p.m. While crystal glasses chimed and laughter echoed across polished marble floors, every phone at the Billionaires' table lit up at once. Smiles froze, hands trembled. Eyes widened. One by one, the color drained from their faces as they stared at the same message. All accounts temporarily suspended. And just a few feet away, the waitress they had been mocking moments earlier stood completely still, her fingers tightening slightly around her phone, her expression unreadable. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe kindness still matters, if you believe people deserve second chances. Stories like this need to be told and remembered. The restaurant was the kind of place where silence itself felt expensive. Soft golden lighting reflected off polished cutlery, and the scent of fine cuisine lingered in the air like a promise only the wealthy could afford. It was a night reserved for power, prestige, and quiet displays of influence. At the center of it all sat a table of 8, business moguls, investors, and social elites who had gathered to celebrate yet another successful acquisition by one of the most powerful billionaires in the city. They wore confidence like a second skin. Their laughter was loud, effortless, and careless. To them, the world had always been a place that bent easily in their favor. And then there was her. She moved quietly between tables, her posture straight, but her presence almost invisible. Her uniform was simple, black shirt, white apron, but her eyes carried something deeper, something heavy. She didn't belong to their world, at least not anymore. To them, she was just another waitress. They noticed her only when she made a mistake, or when they needed something. At first, the remarks were subtle. A dismissive glance, a quiet smirk. Then came the whispers, barely concealed. They laughed at the way she carefully carried the plates, at the way she hesitated before speaking, at the way she seemed too composed for someone in her position. But it didn't stop there. As the evening went on, the laughter grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. They mocked her accent, questioned her intelligence, and treated her like she was invisible, until she wasn't. One of them, slightly drunk on power and wine, decided to test her patience. He deliberately knocked over his glass, watching the liquid spread across the table like a small disaster. She stepped forward instantly, calm and efficient, reaching for a cloth. But instead of stepping back, he leaned closer, his voice dripping with mockery. He asked her if she had ever seen money like this before, if she even understood what it meant to sit at a table like theirs. The others laughed. And she said nothing. She simply cleaned the mess, her movement steady, her face unreadable. But something had shifted, because behind her silence was not weakness, it was control. Years ago, she had lived in a world far more ruthless than this table could ever imagine. A world of numbers, algorithms, and power plays hidden behind screens and contracts. She had built systems that could move billions with a single command. She had designed safeguards for banks that no one else could penetrate. And then she had walked away. Not because she failed, but because she had seen what that world did to people. The greed, the manipulation, the quiet destruction of lives reduced to numbers on a screen. She had chosen a quieter life, a simpler one. But some skills never disappear, and some wounds never truly heal. As she stepped away from the table, she felt her phone vibrate softly in her pocket. A message, one she had been waiting for. Her fingers tightened slightly as she read it. It was time. The table behind her was still laughing, unaware that their world was about to tilt. She walked toward the service station, her movements calm, almost routine. She placed the tray down, took a slow breath, and unlocked her phone. For a moment, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of memory. She remembered the long nights, the pressure, the decisions that affected thousands of lives. She remembered why she left. But she also remembered something else. Respect, something the people at that table had never learned. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second before pressing a single command. That was all it took. Back at the table, the first phone buzzed. Then another, then all of them. The laughter stopped. Confusion replaced arrogance as they checked their screens. One by one, their expressions shifted from irritation to disbelief and then to something far more fragile, fear. Accounts frozen, transactions blocked, access denied. Their voices rose, overlapping, desperate. They refreshed their screens, tried calling their banks, their assistants, anyone who could explain what was happening. But there was no immediate answer. Only silence, and the cold realization that something was very, very wrong. And then they looked up, because suddenly they remembered her. The waitress. She stood a few steps away now, no longer moving, no longer blending into the background. There was a stillness about her that hadn't been there before. This time they didn't laugh. This time they stared. Not because they understood, but because deep down they felt it. Power had shifted. The billionaire at the head of the table, a man who had built empires out of calculated risk, slowly stood up. His confidence was still there, but it was no longer unshaken. He walked toward her, his expression tightening as he tried to piece together the impossible. Because people like him believed in control, and right now he had none. She met his gaze calmly, without hostility, without triumph. Just quiet certainty. She wasn't there to destroy them, she was there to remind them. The room felt different now, the air heavier. Conversations from other tables faded into the background as if the world itself was holding its breath. She knew what they were thinking, that this was a mistake, a glitch, something that could be fixed with a call or a favor, but it wasn't. Because for the first time in their lives, they were experiencing what it felt like to be powerless. The same feeling they had inflicted on others without a second thought. She didn't speak immediately. She didn't need to. The silence was doing the work for her. Each passing second stretched longer, deeper, forcing them to sit with something they had never faced before, consequences. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. One of them, the youngest at the table, lowered his phone slowly. His face was pale, his confidence gone. But there was something else there too. Understanding, because unlike the others, he had seen the world outside their bubble. He knew what it meant to struggle, to be dismissed, to be underestimated. And now he was seeing it from the other side. The realization hit him harder than the frozen accounts ever could, because money could be restored. But character, that was something else entirely. If this story is starting to move you, if you're beginning to feel the weight of what's happening here, take a moment to like, comment, and share. Stories like this remind us of something we often forget: how we treat people matters more than we think. Back at the table, the panic was slowly turning into something quieter, reflection. Because deep down, they knew this wasn't random, this was intentional. And the only person in the room who seemed untouched by the chaos was the one they had laughed at, the one they had dismissed, the one they had underestimated. She finally spoke, not with anger, not with pride, but with a calmness that carried more weight than any accusation. Her words were simple, but they cut deeper than any insult. She spoke about respect, not as a concept, but as a responsibility. She spoke about how easy it is to forget humanity when you believe you're untouchable. And then she stopped, because she didn't need to say more. The lesson had already landed. The billionaire slowly nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Because for the first time, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. Before we reach the ending, here's something special. Drop a comment right now with the word "respect" if you believe no one should ever be judged by their job, their clothes, or their status. The restaurant slowly returned to life, but the energy had changed. The laughter didn't come back. The arrogance didn't return. Only silence and a quiet shift in perspective. She looked at them one last time before turning away, not as a victor, but as someone who had simply reminded them of something they had forgotten. Because real power isn't about controlling others. It's about knowing when not to. As she walked back into the soft glow of the restaurant, her phone vibrated once more. A confirmation everything could be restored. And this time she hesitated for a different reason. Because forgiveness, like power, is a choice. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think, feel, or reflect, even for a moment, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear a story like this today. And somewhere behind her, at a table that once echoed with laughter, 8 people sat in silence, finally understanding that sometimes the smallest person in the room carries the greatest power of all. The notification confirming full control over every account sat quietly on her screen, waiting for a decision that would define far more than just that night. She didn't turn back immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward the far end of the restaurant, where the warm lighting softened and the noise of the world felt distant. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because she doubted herself, but because she understood the weight of what came next. Power was never the difficult part. The difficult part was choosing what to do with it. Behind her, the table remained frozen in silence. The same people who had filled the room with careless laughter now sat with lowered heads, staring at their darkened screens like mirrors reflecting something they had long avoided seeing. For the first time, they were not discussing deals, profits, or strategies. They were confronting themselves, and that was far more uncomfortable. She paused near a window, the city lights stretching endlessly outside like a reminder of how vast the world really was. Far bigger than any one table, any one ego, any one moment of arrogance. Her mind drifted back to a time when she had been just like them, not cruel but distant. Focused on numbers, not people. Efficient but detached. She had once believed that success meant rising above everything, including empathy. But life had corrected her in ways no boardroom ever could. Loss had taught her humility. Isolation had taught her the cost of power without connection. And walking away from it all had taught her something even more important. Peace doesn't come from control. It comes from understanding. Back at the table, the billionaire finally exhaled slowly, his posture no longer rigid, but reflective. He looked at the others, not as partners in success, but as people who had just been stripped of their illusion of invincibility. And in that shared silence, something rare began to form. Awareness. One of the women at the table, who had laughed the loudest earlier, wiped her eyes quietly. It wasn't fear of losing money that shook her. It was the realization of who she had become without even noticing. The jokes, the mocking glances, the casual cruelty, it had all felt normal. Until now. The youngest man leaned back slightly, his gaze distant. He didn't look angry. He looked changed. Like someone who had just witnessed a truth he could never unsee, and perhaps that was the real consequence. Not the frozen accounts, but the awakening. The billionaire stood up again, but this time, there was no urgency in his movement, no demand for control. Just a quiet determination to face something honestly for the first time in a long while. He walked toward her, not as a man trying to fix a problem, but as someone ready to understand it. She sensed his presence before he spoke. Not through sound, but through energy. It was different now. Less forceful, less entitled, more human. When she turned to face him, there was no tension in her expression, no anger, no satisfaction, just calm. And in that calm, he realized something that unsettled him deeply. She didn't need to prove anything. She never had. The power she held wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed. He didn't ask her to reverse what she had done. He didn't threaten or negotiate. Because he understood something now. This wasn't about money. This was about respect. And respect couldn't be bought back with urgency. It had to be earned. The silence between them stretched for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. Like a pause before something meaningful finally begins. She looked at him not as a billionaire, not as a powerful figure, but as a man who had just been given a rare opportunity to see himself clearly. And then, without saying much, she nodded slightly. Not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. Behind him, the others slowly stood as well, their earlier arrogance replaced by something quieter, more grounded. No one spoke, no one interrupted. They simply waited, because now they understood that not everything in life responds to urgency. Some things require patience, growth, and humility. Her phone remained in her hand, the confirmation still glowing faintly on the screen. She could end it all with a single tap, restore everything, let them return to their world unchanged. Or she could leave it as it was. Let the lesson linger. Let the discomfort do its work. She closed her eyes briefly, not to escape the moment, but to fully feel it, because this wasn't about revenge. It never was. This was about balance. And sometimes balance doesn't come from punishment. It comes from perspective. When she opened her eyes again, something had settled inside her. Clarity. Without looking at her phone, she pressed the screen gently. Behind her, almost instantly, the room shifted again. Phones buzzed. Screens lit up. Access restored. Accounts active. Everything was back. But something important was not. The illusion. The billionaire looked down at his phone, then back at her. There was no relief in his expression, only quiet understanding. Because he knew what had really changed. And it wasn't numbers on a screen. It was something deeper. Something lasting. The others returned to their seats slowly, but no one resumed eating. No one laughed. The energy at the table had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Stillness, reflection, respect. She turned away once more, walking back toward her duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To the rest of the restaurant, she was still just a waitress moving gracefully between tables, but to those 8 people, she was something else entirely. A reminder, a lesson, a turning point, and maybe that was it. Before this story comes to an end, here's one final request. If this journey touched your heart even a little, comment the word kindness below. Because sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest changes. As the night slowly came to a close, the billionaire's table remained quiet. Not broken, but rebuilt in a way none of them expected, because they had come to celebrate power, but they left understanding something far greater. That true strength isn't measured by wealth, influence, or control. It's measured by how you treat the people who have nothing to give you in return. And sometimes the person you overlook today holds the power to change your entire world tomorrow.